thought we would do, Shashi, is, go a little bit into the background of who you are and who are some of your teachers and what have you learned from them. And this is some of the things the students have asked you already, but I thought it'll be good for the people to know also is that you're very well known for your talks, your debates, for being a great orator. And at Inc., we keep talking about the importance of storytelling. Why is it important for us to know, to tell our stories? So tell us a little bit about your father and where was this instilled in you about the importance of communication? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it was my father who, when I was very young, insisted I start debating and elocuting and speechifying. He had this insight early on that the single most valuable thing you can learn is how to communicate. And I want to say that to all of you because honestly, it's true. In whatever profession you go on to do, whether you become an engineer working in a company and dealing with customers or consumers, whether you go on to be a doctor dealing with your patients, whether you're a bureaucrat in a hierarchical organization trying to explain to your boss what you think about something or to a subordinate what you want him or her to do. Whatever it is you choose to do in life, you're going to have to be able to express your thoughts and your wishes, to get your ideas into somebody else's mind and to persuade them to agree with you or at least to respect your way of seeing things. And that applies even in your personal life. You want to persuade an attractive young person to go out with you, you'll need to also communicate effectively why they should want to do that. So the truth is, communication works right across the board in every profession, at every stage of your life, in your personal as well as in your work. And therefore, I think that the ability to formulate your thoughts, to express yourself clearly, to marshal an opinion, collect a number of facts, think them through and put them into a cogent point of view, the clarity with which you express these things, the way you choose certain words in which to convey them, all of this become amongst your greatest assets in reaching out to other people. So I urge you all to practice it. After all of us are talking all the time. Every day, unless you've taken a vipassana vow, you're talking to somebody or the other. Use the opportunity to talk clearly, to express your thoughts. Initially, those of you who are reticent or don't enjoy doing it may find it challenging, but believe me, nothing works better with practice than communication. Because getting your point across, you see that light shining in the other person's eyes, you've scored and you'll want to do it again.
Yeah. The next thing is about, throughout your school, college, at Tufts, there's been a certain inclination for you to go into public life. You went to UN right off. Can you tell me who was a teacher or a professor or someone who instilled this interest in you to actually go to United Nations?
It wasn't actually a professor or anything. It really, I don't know, just came from within to a great extent. The desire to make a difference was there from a very, very small age. Don't ask me why and how, but I always felt that if one has to look for a reason as to why we're here on this planet, it would ultimately be a futile thing to just live and die unless between living and dying you do things that really make a difference for your having been here. Not all of us can be like the great Dr. Pai and create an institution that educates generations of people perhaps. But many of us can make, or any of us can make a difference initially in the lives of the people around us, our family, our friends. Not everybody has to be an ace or a university topper or a gold medalist. Some of us may simply be good at making other people happy. That's a great art. Some of us may be good at making other people laugh. That's also a great art. Some of us may just be the kind of people want to be around because we are a good company to be with. All of these things are also arts. Whatever it may be that we're good at, develop that, focus on it, is my sort of very elementary philosophy. Because in so doing, we affect the lives of others. And affecting the lives of others is the best argument. Now, of course, for me, reading about the world was for some reason always of great interest. And while I was passionate about India, the United Nations seemed to offer a platform to the world as a whole. And even had I done the sort of expected thing and taken the UPSC competitive examinations, I would have opted for the foreign service and not the domestic, because I had this very global orientation right then and right throughout. But having said that, when the time came for me to possibly take those examinations, it was the time of the emergency. I was deeply troubled by the government locking up people, censoring newspapers. In fact, even one of my short stories got censored, banned, in fact, in 1975. It's a short story called The Political Murder, and the censors didn't like the idea of any political murders in our country. But anyway, to cut a long story short, I ended up not taking the examinations and instead going to do my graduate degrees and my doctorate in international affairs, and then almost stumbling into the United Nations, working for refugees initially, then in peacekeeping, then with Kofi Annan, and having gone initially for a year or two to gain some international experience, I ended up spending a 29-year career at the UN. But with absolutely no regrets, I felt that I was able to leave my smudgy thumbprints on the footnotes of the pages of history, of dealing with some of the great events of our time, whether the Vietnamese boat people, the Yugoslav Civil War, the UN at the end of the Cold War. These are all issues that I was directly involved in working in. And I felt those to be very, very great privilege to be able to do that.
And I think, on that note, what will be interesting to talk about is that there is a lot of focus on entrepreneurship, the recognition as a founder, the recognition as somebody who's made it. And when you're in public service, a lot of the things that you have done, they don't even have your name anywhere on it. So it's a job that you do. You know what you've done. But when you launch a satellite there, the names of the scientists are not there. So how do you, and I think it's extremely important for the young people to understand, how do you derive satisfaction out of what you have done, whether you personally get credit for it or not? Right.
Well, yes, you first of all, you're totally right that in most of the work I've done, there's no personal credit. In fact, even the instructions that I would send to the peacekeeping operations on Yugoslavia didn't bear my name. So
but if you don't do well, they'll know it's you. But
well, yeah. In fact, people got used to knowing which cable was drafted by me because my language was so unmistakable. But the truth was still that there is anonymity. It's institutional work that you're doing. But the satisfaction comes from making the impact you're making on the lives of people. So whether it's the refugee work where one knew that the efforts one had made during the day meant that I could put my head to the pillow at night, knowing I changed people's lives for the better. I mean, I'd rescued people. I've been able to negotiate their finding homes in new countries, resettlement, through my negotiations. I'd been able to bring such persuasive skills as I may have had to persuading governments, officials, ministers, to do things they might not otherwise have wanted to do if I hadn't been able to be effective. So all of that makes a big difference, and that was the satisfaction. But in my case, I also had another outlet. So all my professional work, I had no personal recognition, but all my writing was in my own name. It was entirely my personal thing. So in that sense, what personal recognition I wanted, I got through my writing, and the professional satisfaction I got anonymously.
So that's a great segue into you being an author. And one of the things people ask you all the time, and I know, so let me ask this, is that you have a very busy schedule, and you travel all the time, you have work-related stuff, and then you churn out these books. So where do you find the time to write them, and when do you write them?
Well, first of all, you only need to find time if you've lost it in the first place. So I think it's important to really use every single minute that the good Lord has given each of us, rather than, obviously, one of Kofi Annan's lines I remember used to be, to live is to choose. And you're always choosing. My writing comes at the expense of a number of other things I might enjoy doing, socializing with friends, watching movies, watching cricket matches, just taking it easy. I tend not to have the time to do all of those things as much as I would like to, because whenever I find a spare moment, I'm at the computer writing. And that is undoubtedly a selfish thing to do, but it's necessary for me, because as George Bernard Shaw rather memorably said, I write for the same reason a cow gives milk. It's inside me, it's got to come out, and I feel that like a cow, I would be in real pain if I didn't have that. So that's what I do. But the second thing as to how I managed to produce these books, aside from the fact that I don't sleep enough and I don't amuse myself enough with other things, is that, again, in the words of a famous humorist, an American writer called A.J. Liebling, I write faster than anybody who writes better, and I write better than anybody who writes faster. That's why I'm able to produce these books.
So your choice of words is pretty good as well. So since we are talking about your writing, so what we thought we should do is this is your latest book, An Era of Darkness, and this came out of an Oxford debate you had, etc. So I was very taken by, you quote about the India that was when the British came. A lot of the times there's an argument that it's much more civilized now, so British left us much better than we were, etc. But you actually write about the India that was. So it's in page 3-4. I'll give it to you. You can read it. And I thought after that, I want you to answer the question. One of the things is India was this, and yet somebody could come and take over. And part of progress is to get people from all over, the best from all over, to come here, and yet not give in. So I want you to read it and then tell us your views on how do we balance the two. So here it is, marked, the India that was.
Actually, this is not my words. This is the words of a book written in 1890 by an English-born American priest, a Unitarian minister called J.T. Sunderland, where he was describing the India that the British East India Company had conquered. Because, as I've said just earlier in the same paragraph, it was no primitive or barren land, but the glittering jewel of the medieval world. Its accomplishments and prosperity were succinctly described in this passage I'll read to you by this Reverend Sunderland. Nearly every kind of manufacture or product known to the civilized world, nearly every kind of creation of man's brain and hand, existing anywhere and prized either for its utility or beauty, had long been produced in India. India was a far greater industrial and manufacturing nation than any in Europe or any other in Asia. Her textile goods, the fine products of her looms in cotton, wool, linen, and silk, were famous all over the civilized world. In fact, I've recounted elsewhere in the book how British shopkeepers would try and pass off shoddy English-made goods as made in India, because made in India was the hallmark of high quality in the world in those days. Were famous all over the civilized world. So were her exquisite jewelry and her precious stones, cut in every lovely form. So were her pottery, porcelain, ceramics of every kind, quality, color, and beautiful shape. So were her fine works in metal, iron, steel, silver, and gold. She had great architecture, equal in beauty to any in the world. She had great engineering works. She had great merchants, businessmen, bankers, and financiers. Not only was she the greatest shipbuilding nation, but she had great commerce and trade by land and sea, which extended to all known civilized countries. Such was the India which the British found when they came. In fact, when the British came, our share of the world economy was 23%. It's as large as the whole of Europe put together, and had been 27% in 1700 when Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb's treasury raked in £100 million in those days in tax revenues alone. That's like easily $10 billion today. Now, by the time the British departed India, it dropped to less than 3%, and the reason was simple. India was governed for the benefit of Britain. Britain's rise for 200 years was financed by its depredations in India. And I've given examples of how, for example, when our steel was so fine, it was actually manufactured for the first time in your state, in Karnataka. And it was known to the world as wood steel, WOTZ, which was a corruption by the Western years of the Kannada word ukku steel. And ukku steel was apparently an Indian technology so prized the Arabs came and learned it from us to make the famous Damascus steel. And Indian steel was of such high quality that when the British shot our soldiers, our sepoys, they would dismount and steal the sword of the dead Indian, because the Indian sword was so much superior to any steel sword available anywhere in Europe. Similarly, our shipbuilding, our ships used to last 23, 24 years were made of teak and mahogany and fine craftsmanship, whereas European ships lasted never more than 6 or 7 years because their fir and pine simply were not up to the conditions of the water. So in every respect, we had world leadership in all of these areas: steel, shipbuilding, textiles, jewelry, all the examples given. And sadly, the British systematically dismantled and trampled across all of that.
Now, the thing is, when we were so strong, when we had so much, basically a company could come and slowly take over. Is it because we were very fragmented, or what were the things that made such a huge entity, such a successful entity to fall prey?
Well,
and what do we do today to still have everybody come in and at the same time preserve who we are?
Right. So, I mean, it really was a combination of everything you're hinting at. We were fragmented. The Mughal Empire was dissolving, and though nominally they were still in control, in practice there were lots of local principalities, Nawabs, Maharajas, Nizams, etc., controlling their own turf. On top of that, there was superior artillery on the part of the Europeans. They had guns, and the techniques of European warfare were superior to our relatively old-fashioned techniques crafted in an earlier age. So when modern guns and modern military techniques met our vast but not very modern armies, it was an unequal contest on the battlefield. And finally, there was the great Indian talent for betrayal and letting ourselves down. So the British were happy to oblige. And so if you look, for example, at Bengal, after they defeated Siraj-ud-Dawla at the Battle of Plassey, Mir Jafar paid the British East India Company to put him on the throne in place of Siraj-ud-Dawla. Then Mir Qasim came and paid the East India Company to put him on the throne in place of Mir Jafar. Then Mir Jafar came with more money so that he could be put back on the throne in place of Mir Qasim. And the British happily profited from each of these deals. And they robbed the treasury blind each time. So our own capacity to sell ourselves, I mean, again, since we're in Karnataka, I should tell you the story of my visit to Seringapattnam, Srirangapatnam, where Tipu Sultan had managed his last stand. Even though he had suffered a couple of battlefield reversals, his fort was actually quite impregnable and he could have regrouped there. He had a magnificent moat built full of water and crocodiles. And there was no way the British were going to be able to cross that moat. But he had secret passageways under the water in order to allow supplies and so on to come in. So he was actually sitting quite pretty. How did the British manage to defeat him? Because one of his courtiers betrayed the secret passage, the gate under the water. And in fact, when I went to Srirangapatnam, the tourist guide said to me, "Sir, second water gate, Washington. First water gate, Srirangapatnam." Because that was through the water gate that the invaders were able to come in and kill Tipu. So we betrayed ourselves a lot, and that's unfortunately part of our legacy as well.
So my last question to you, Shashi, is that you've chosen to be in Indian politics. You had a lot of options. You could have been in many international organizations, or I personally know a lot of private companies were after you for probably multiples of money you can make here. And the Indian politics has been kind to you as well as harsh to you. You've been through everything. What makes you stay? Why don't you go do something else? Why are you doing what you're doing?
You know, it's not an easy question to answer because you're right. Number one, if you're an honest man, you don't go to politics for money because certainly there's no money in it. My salary is 50,000 rupees a month. And I have to maintain offices both in Delhi and in my constituency. I have to maintain vehicles, staff, pay electricity bills, phone bills, give endless cups of tea to visitors in both places. Obviously, no one can do that on 50,000 rupees a month. So I have to supplement my income, which I do through writing and so on. But there are, I'm afraid, others who find it necessary to supplement their income in other ways. And I think it's a shame that we conduct our politics in that manner. But that is unfortunately part of the problem. Secondly, you're also right that politics has been rather harsh to me. I went through a rather severe Agni Pariksha in my first few years in politics. My back is still perforated with the stilettos sunk into it from, in some cases, even from people on my own side of the political equation, and in some cases from the other side. When the former diplomat Natwar Singh became a minister, he recounted to me the story of how he had gone to his swearing in a Western suit. So he very apologetically said to Mrs. Gandhi, Indira Gandhi, Madam, I better get some Bangala stitched. And she apparently said, no, Natwar, in politics, you'd better grow a thicker skin. And in my case, I've had to grow a thicker skin the hard way. So why am I still at it? Well, I'm at it because in a democracy, politics is still the one genuine way in which you can make a difference to this country's future, and you can do it through the force of your beliefs and arguments and through influencing the minds of people right across the country to agree with you that your way is a better way. I mean, after all, that is what Mr. Modi has done, and he spent many, many years in the wilderness before getting to be in a position to make this kind of difference. For me, I recognize that having come into politics late, there may well be limits in what I can accomplish, but at least I can make my contribution. There are problems, there are frustrations, but it's my country. And when I look in the mirror, and I did so year after year living abroad, I was born in London, I was entitled to a British passport, I never took one. As I said, and I look in the mirror, I see an Indian. And as an Indian, I cannot be indifferent to the problems of India and the hopes of India, because India represents, in many ways, one of the most exciting places for the future of the world at this time of the century. I think that we are at the cusp of some of the most important debates facing the world at this time of the century. I wrote this in my book, India from Midnight to the Millennium. We are thrashing out a number of very important issues through our political and democratic experiments, and eventually you folks might be the leaders of the world in the 21st century. But we've got to overcome a lot of handicaps to get this right. I believe we can, and I'm glad to play my own small part in it, in writing the story of that great adventure.
We used to, when I used to talk to Shashi, I also still have an Indian passport after living somewhere for 20 plus years. We used to joke that the only time you regret it is when you have to travel abroad and you have to go for the visa to just about every country you have to go to. But when we overcome that, that's when I think we'll be great. So last thing, Shashi, I think all the students are here for you. What is your message to the students of Manipal University?
Well, my message to all young people is never give up. I mean, it's basically to keep striving at being the best that you can be. Ultimately, all we can do is not to let ourselves down. I know our teachers and our students and our parents in particular are constantly comparing us to others. Did you come first in class? Did you get better than the neighbor's son? Did your marks outshine so-and-so's daughter? He keeps boasting about her, etc. But comparing to others, in my mind, is a foolish game. We do too much of it. The most important thing is to compare yourself to yourself, to what you know you're capable of doing. Every one of us, as I said earlier today, has some talent, some ability. Recognize what your strengths are, develop them and fulfill them. Don't let yourself down. Be the best you that you can be, because nobody can be a better you than you can be. If you can do that, you will succeed and the country will gain from your success.